Cooper coming out a little ahead in this. He's got polling about 47% in our poll here to Michael Watley's 39%. Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. We're talking today, we've got some big news out just today, a brand new poll. It's been in the field over the last few days, finding out what you think about North Carolina's Senate race, about tariffs, about crime. We're going to break down some of these numbers today. Joining us here on the couches, we have, of course, Donald Bryson, CEO of the John Locke Foundation, and then Mitch Kokai, senior policy analyst for the John Locke Foundation as well, and, of course, David Larson, managing editor of Carolina Journal. Okay, we're going to jump right into this. The North Carolina's race for U.S. Senate. This is something we've all been talking about. Some big announcements have been over the last month. It looks like, although we haven't had a primary yet, it looks like it's going to be former Governor Roy Cooper and former RNC Chairman Michael Watley, also the former head of the NC GOP. Roy Cooper coming out a little ahead in this. He's got polling about 47% in our poll here to Michael Watley's 39%. But Roy Cooper, everybody knows who that is, and Michael Watley, only about 51% of people know what that is. Tell me, know who he is. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, no, 51% of people said that they had never heard of Michael Watley. I think that this is a good baseline poll. There's nothing surprising about these results to me in particular. Roy Cooper has been in elected office in North Carolina since 1986. He was Attorney General elected statewide 4 times over 16 years. He was governor for 8 years over 2 terms.
So everybody knows.
If people don't know who Roy Cooper is in North Carolina, they just moved here or they just became a voter. But most people know who he is. Michael Watley's never run for elected office before, other than within the GOP itself, which, unless you are very rooted into what's going on in the GOP, you've never actually voted for Michael Watley. So the fact that Watley's undefined, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's an opportunity for Cooper to sort of jump on it and create a narrative, but it's also an opportunity for Watley to jump out there and create a narrative for himself. And so this is a poll that just sets a baseline of this is where we started on this. We'll see where Watley's numbers go from here. We'll see where Cooper's numbers go from here. I think that overall, and we're a long way out from that general election, that Cooper lead is soft. I think this is still going to be a very close race.
All right, so what do you think, David? Is 47 to 39, is that a good indication for Michael Watley to be, within 10 points of the former governor?
I think it could go either way, really, because a lot of people haven't heard of him, and 51% is a lot of people to introduce Watley to.
So there's work to do. Yeah.
There's work to do. I think it's a little early to say whether it's a positive or a negative, but there is a risk there. I think in that negative advertising is often more effective than positive. So if somebody's undefined and both sides are trying to define them, that could be a risk. But a lot of people say there's not really a lot of dirt. It's not like, with Mark Robinson, there was stories that would come out. It doesn't seem like, from who I've talked to, that there's anything like that coming. He seems like a very professional guy. And so there will be a lot of, negative advertising, of course.
But so the Trump endorsement, that should work for him, you think?
That will depend, I guess, on how Trump is viewed. If we're going to go past the primaries and look at the general, and that's what we're measuring here, I guess, then that will really depend on how Trump is viewed at that point. And a lot of times, whichever party's in power, and at the highest level, that does have a negative kind of
a drag.
The coattails aren't good at that point in midterms, but it could be that that Trump is really successful and he's vindicated on a bunch of things, and then maybe it will be good that he's that closely linked.
Yeah, you're watching this particularly about how this breaks down among parties. This Trump endorsement's got to be powerful for certainly among Republicans.
Certainly, and that's one of the reasons why we are unlikely to see a competitive primary. Once Donald Trump said Michael Watley should jump into this race, then everyone else who's a Republican candidate or potential candidate said, I'm not getting in this race. Let's let Michael Watley do it. To me, if before this poll, if you ask people, who's more likely to win this race, Roy Cooper or Michael Watley. If they had even heard of Michael Watley, they still would say Roy Cooper. And so I think, as has been alluded to, this is basically kind of where things start. Roy Cooper has a lead. It's not insurmountable. If you look at some of the other numbers, and we asked about the favorability of both of these people, along with the actual head-to-head matchup. On the head-to-head matchup, among Democrats, Cooper 90-4.
Wow.
90-4. Among Republicans, Watley also has a big lead, but it's 77-7.
Sure.
And that suggests to me that there are at least a number of Republicans out there who say, well, you know, I see that this is the Republican candidate, but I'm not quite sure because I don't know anything about this guy. But once they know more about him, and once they realize, oh, it's either him or Cooper, there probably more Republicans go to Watley. Among the independents right now, it's Cooper 46-40. So these are folks who could probably go one way or another, and it's a closer, smaller gap among those folks than it is in that overall number, which is probably another positive sign for Watley. Also, looking at, as was mentioned, Donald said that 51% in the people, 51% of the people in the poll, when asked about Watley and favorability, said they'd never heard of him, and that number was highest among Democrats. So I think that's a positive sign, because you're not going into this race with Democrats looking at the Republicans saying, this is someone we hate and we're going to jump over burning coals to vote against this person. If they've ever heard of Michael Watley, they probably just think, oh, just another Republican, which is probably a good sign for Watley. He's not going to be someone who will fire up Democrats against him.
Sure. Do you think we should be looking at the generic legislative for a signal of where we might be going for the Senate race?
Well, I think both the generic congressional and legislative races show really a dead heat. We have seen over this poll, and Donald could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think generally over the past couple of years we've seen Republicans with a small lead. There was maybe one poll where they had a 4 or 5 point lead, which seemed a little high, but it's generally been Republicans with a small lead. This time around, it's basically dead heat.
It is,
Republicans
45,
with a few percentage points on one of them, and Democrats with 0.1 percentage point lead on the other. So it's basically a race that for the congressional ballot for anyone to win, depending on who the candidates are. So Cooper having a lead shows that he is outperforming what a generic Democrat would do. But that's to be expected. As Donald said, he's won 6 statewide elections, including 2 races for governor. We know about the Trump-Cooper voters who came out in the 2016 and 2020 elections, who voted for Trump for president, voted for Cooper for governor. Cooper's going to be hoping that some of those people will remain with him this time around, but this time he's going for a federal office, which is different, and that will probably come into play.
Sure.
I was saying, I did see kind of a hint maybe in that congressional and legislative ballots, or and state legislative ballots, the generics, that the unaffiliated voters did have quite a lean. So, you know, looking forward, if you have all the Republicans basically being pretty predictably going to their side and all the Democrats, the unaffiliateds were 40 going to the GOP and 47 going to the Democrat.
So they're leaning Democrat.
They're leaning Democrat, and also the strong numbers were 36% of unaffiliateds were strong for Democrats. It was pretty high numbers, and you know, going into a midterm, sometimes that can be a bad sign. We do have a lot of unaffiliated voters now, increasingly in the state, and they, you know, with the 2 other, you know, more partisan sides being locked in, that can often be kind of the weather vane to keep an eye on.
Right. Well, you know, let's talk a little bit about North Carolina's Governor Josh Stein. This is only really our second poll on his approval ratings. It's softening a little. He's not getting as high an approval rating this time in August as he did, say, in May. Do you think, so right now we're looking at Josh Stein's approval rating is still pretty strong with Democrats around 71%. Only 27% of Republicans, independents, are around 56%. The decline is mostly in those independents that you're talking about. What do you think we're seeing here?
I think, you know, when anybody comes into office, particularly an executive office, there's a grace period there. We saw it with Joe Biden. It continued for a long time with Roy Cooper, and we saw that with Josh Stein. And it's sort of coming into office as a generic Democrat or a generic Republican, and then you get a record. right? And people begin to have opinions about what that record is. And so I think that's just the natural course of what we're seeing. I think it would be remarkable if he kept up the long-term favorability ratings of what Roy Cooper has been able to do. I doubt that'll be able to happen. I think that's an anomaly in North Carolina politics. But I think that's just sort of the natural course of things right now.
It is. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would think that Stein has to be happy with these numbers. They aren't as high as they were back in March. We had his approval at 56% and disapproval at 20%. I mean, he was 35, 36 points above water, which in an evenly divided state in such a partisan atmosphere doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This actually brings it a little bit closer to what you might expect, with his approval at 50.5% and disapproval at 30%. So that 35-point positive margin drops to 20, but it's still very good news for him. And probably what we are seeing is the impact of the fact that he is finally now, several months into his term, taken some stances that are against Republicans. And one of the things that he did quite a bit from the time he was elected to the time that he really first started working with legislators was talking about ways to work in a bipartisan fashion. They talked about Hurricane Helene relief and had quite a bit of bipartisan buy-in. And even Republicans, when asked about him, said that the Stein office was much more cooperative than Cooper's people have been. So there have been, if you go back in history, the era of good feelings, which lasted in the United States probably longer than it will in North Carolina. But I think it remains to be seen whether he can keep that same pattern going, or as more divisions crop up in the General Assembly where Stein steps in and has his veto, do people return to form and say, okay, this is a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I got to be against him, and vice versa.
Sure.
One thing I noticed was on the vetoes, the public perception of
That's
those.
what I was wondering,
He did have a little bit of an edge over the Republicans in that battle, where, when the public sees a bunch of vetoes and then sees the Republican legislature come back and override those, we were kind of curious how that was perceived, and it looked like 36% thought that his vetoes were a good kind of check on the legislature, and 33%. It's probably pretty partisan.
Yeah, it was pretty evenly split between
about
unsure,
a third.
Yeah, I think not enough people know about the details of that.
Well, yes, and if you looked at the numbers, it really had an interesting breakdown, because the choices were, is this a good check on legislative overreach? And as David said, that was about 36%. And then was it just partisan efforts that were trying to obstruct the Republicans, and that was about 33%, and then the unsure was the other almost a third. But if you look at the partisan breakdown among Republicans, 62% chose the negative option, 9% the positive option. Among Democrats, 59% chose the positive option, 8% the negative option. And then probably the independents are the most interesting group here, and they were more likely to think it was a good idea for Stein to have his veto than not. It was 41% to 30%. That probably falls in line with what David was saying earlier, with on the generic ballot leaning toward the Democrats. We might be seeing a slightly more friendly Democratic poll grouping this time around than we have in some other polls.
All right, what about the president? Donald Trump's approval rating in North Carolina seems to be steady. We're right about, 48% or so here in North Carolina. Do you think that means that it's going to pave the way for someone like Michael Watley, more Republicans in the General Assembly?
Well, what was interesting is that the approval rating stayed, right there, 47, 48.
Yeah.
Which was down a bit from, they all get their honeymoon bump, from in November. But the disapprove, especially the strongly disapprove, went up quite a bit. So it's like he was steady on approve, but disapprove, you saw, I think a lot of people might have been giving him another shot, people who were trying to figure out who to vote for exactly, maybe not like both candidates. But that disapprove went up to, I believe,
50.3, it looks like.
50.3, and a very high percentage of those.
Nobody's unsure, though.
Nobody's unsure.
That's right.
And like 45% of that 50% was strongly disapproved. So I think there are some things that, while those who have liked him have stayed pretty steady in liking him, the people who were watching, trying to make up their minds, seem to be more making it up against him, which could be a negative sign, I guess, in that factor.
And a shocker. The parties are evenly split on what they feel about Trump.
Right.
If you look at the approval
yeah.
among Republicans, it's
right on
90% approval versus 9% disapproval. Among Democrats, almost the exact opposite, 91% disapproval, 9% approval. Among independents, as David was just saying, that they seem to be going a little bit more toward the disapprove at 51% versus 46% who approve, which for Watley is something to watch, because he is going to be seen as being tied to Trump. And if Trump's numbers start looking bad by the time that people are having to get ballots and get votes in November, then he'll have to have some sort of strategy of saying, yes, I'm the Trump candidate for all you people who like him, but for those of you who don't, vote for me for X reason.
Sure. Very interesting. You can find all the crosstabs, all the details on these numbers. First, you can pause the video here and take a look at this slide. But also, we've got it on carolinajournal.com, and we want to know what you think. Comment below. Make sure you follow. Head over to carolinajournal.com with all the details. I want to talk also some of the questions we had on tariffs. This is something we've been talking a lot about at the John Locke Foundation and in Carolina Journal. The John Locke Foundation being the publishing organization for Carolina Journal and a free market think tank. So it's been really interesting because I know that this has split Republicans. This is an issue that has really posed a challenge on how we approach the economy, what tariffs will do. One of the things that we talked about is that in this poll, 2/3 of those polled believe that tariffs have increased goods, the cost of goods for consumers, 2/3. Yet, 2/3 of Republicans back using tariffs. I just thought that really illustrated the dichotomy that we're in here. Tell me what you think.
Well, I mean, I think American politics is incredibly tribal, right? My guy says that this is a good thing, and so it must be a good thing because the other people says it's a bad thing, and I don't trust them.
Interesting.
And it does. If Joe Biden had implemented a tariff regime, we would have Republicans crawling all over the place talking about why free trade is a great thing and free markets are a good thing. And unfortunately, from a free market organization perspective, it looks like Republicans have turned on their principles that they've talked about since Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, right, about why free trade and free markets are a good thing. It was Ronald Reagan who said, government isn't the solution to the problem, government is the problem. And now we've got Republicans saying, well, it's not that Democrats having power was so bad, it's that they didn't use the power right. And that's generally what we're seeing out of the White House and Republicans nationally right now. And so, this whole tariff thing is very, very strange to me. It's going to be difficult for Michael Watley, right? Because you have 62% of people right now saying it's going to increase prices. He's already going to be tied to Donald Trump. And so how do you spin the problem with tariffs? Now, we've not seen the full brunt of the costs of tariffs just yet.
That's important, right?
Because they were announced on April 9th. They were immediately delayed by 90 days, and then they were delayed again to August 1st, and now most of them with China have been delayed, or China's have been implemented throughout this whole time, but a new deal has been delayed for another 90 days, and so the markets and businesses trying to figure out what the tariffs are and how to adjust their prices and all that have been doing this. Nobody knows what to do. But we do know that wholesale prices have gone up. Wholesale inflation went up 0.9%. Far beyond what anybody thought it would go over the last month. And two, a lot of that inventory that people bought back in April and May has been sold out. And so unfortunately, if the prices do go up on consumer goods, it's going to come up at Christmas time, which is going to be something that people remember as they go into 2026.
Right. But I always wonder if people really do remember. I feel like it's a 12-month cycle for memory, and it'll be interesting to compare these numbers to what we're going to poll later in the fall. Tell me what your thoughts on this. Is this a party division?
It really is. And we mentioned that 62% of people who answered this poll question said that tariffs do raise prices, have raised prices. But only 34% of Republicans agree with that. Only a third of Republicans agree that tariffs raise prices, which by definition, tariffs raise prices. I mean, so
money's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yes. If the price goes up, so a third of Republicans are denying, or only a third of Republicans are agreeing with reality on that front. When you asked about in the next question, what's the best trade policy, or the free markets, get rid of the trade barriers on one side versus tariffs and protectionism on the other, The overall result was 46% of people supporting the free trade, John Locke Foundation supported version versus 37% who were on the tariffs and protectionism side. But if you look at the party breakdown, only 13% of Republicans supported the free trade option.
And that's a Trump dynamic.
Yes,
You
it
think
is.
It
It is.
Yes.
Two-thirds, as you mentioned, were against that and were for the using the tariffs.
Right.
Whereas on the Democratic side, 75% supported the free market option, which I hope Donald will remind them about this when this comes up in future policy debates.
I'm glad they've come along.
That's right. That's right. And only 7% of them supported the tariff option. Among independents, it was 48% supporting the free market option, 36% the tariffs option, which, if you're looking for a bright side in this, perhaps it's that the people who aren't already tied to one party or the other are more likely to support the free market option. And then the last question, which we haven't got to yet, which is, has Trump increased manufacturing jobs
which
so
was
far?
the goal, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, and yes was the answer for 40%, no was the answer for 44%. And once again, huge partisan split. 75% of Republican voters saying yes, 78% of Democratic voters saying no, and among
Which means that nobody actually knows.
Right, they don't
it's a partisan
know.
thing.
They don't know it's partisan. And among the independents, it was almost what the overall number was, 43% saying no and 39% yes.
Right, what do you think?
Yeah, I think sometimes voters take a few things into account, and this is probably one of those things. Their partisanship is obviously one of those things.
Right.
But they also see, most people seem to acknowledge, okay, prices do go up, but then they also see things like, I want manufacturing jobs. There's things maybe being put into that pot now that maybe weren't.
There's a lot of variables, yeah.
There are a lot of variables, but I think it's maybe dangerous for Republicans there, because when you ask people about, what are you struggling with, when we had that other question, they're not as much bringing up things like manufacturing jobs. I don't think that's a top concern necessarily, but when we're asking about their daily economic interests.
Well, that's the important thing, right? Because it all comes down to, what are you worried about personally? You're not worried necessarily about policy. You're not worried necessarily the cost of goods, things like that.
The cost of goods was the top thing. It was household goods and healthcare costs were their two biggest. We gave them a bunch of options, and people, it was, the vast majority of people thought, their bills, the cost of things. And we had another question comparing interest rates, which Trump sometimes tries to say that's a big problem. That's the main problem with costs, or just the cost of the goods. And most people chose the cost of the goods. So I think they have to take seriously the fact that, just like with Biden, where inflation got hung over his head when the price of goods were going up, the same kind of thing could happen if tariffs raised the prices of goods, and that's an easy thing to point to for Democrats during an election season. Everybody's concerned about costs going up, and this is something that can be hung around their neck.
Sure. What's the big takeaway, you think, from this poll? We've got lots of different details, but really it does come down to, we're setting a baseline from here to November 2026, right?
Yeah, no, this is a great baseline poll, and again, urge people to take a look at it at carolinajournal.com. I think Michael Watley, what I take away from this is that Michael Watley has a very large opportunity to define himself.
Okay.
And what we can expect to see from Michael Watley is a classic sort of blocking and tackling campaign where he is saying really nice things about himself and really negative things about Roy Cooper, and it's just a matter of, can he do it enough in order to pull out a win. Roy Cooper is going to be really interesting to watch because he's got such a large record. And so how is he going to answer questions about 888 days under an emergency order in COVID-19? How is he going to answer hurricane recovery questions? And how is he going to talk about issues of wanting to be bipartisan and get things done in Washington with a Republican president? Because Donald Trump's not going to go anywhere when he's elected if he's elected next year. At the same time, he was so contentious with Republicans in the state legislature.
Sure. Well, Democrats do not have a great track record of U.S. Senate seats, and having Trump come down and campaign for Michael Watley, you can't really put a number on that. It seems really powerful.
Well, it certainly will have an impact, and as long as Trump remains fairly strong among North Carolina voters, it would be a positive impact. We've already talked about the fact that these economic issues could change things. I mean, people have liked Trump. They've given him the state's electoral votes 3 times, the first person to do that since FDR. But if you get to the point where when people are actually casting ballots, when they're looking at their pocketbooks, their savings, the bills that they're facing, and saying, wait a minute, this is a lot more expensive. I thought Trump was going to do something positive about this. If they sour on Trump, that's bad news for Watley. And I think that, to me, the most interesting thing that will happen in the coming weeks and months is, when do these campaigns really start ramping up?
Right.
I mean, we know way early essentially who the two candidates are, but when do they really start pouring money into defining themselves and attacking the other people? We've already seen some attempts at this right now, but there's not a lot of money.
Sure.
There's not a lot of attention being paid. At some point, though, it's really going to kick into high gear. Normally, that would be around Labor Day of the election year. My sense is it will be a lot earlier this time.
Sure. Any takeaways from this?
Yeah, I was just thinking, based on all that spending and all the ads, if 51% of people have not heard of Watley, they are about to hear a lot about him.
We're hearing like $700 million for this campaign. This is going to be really crazy. Make sure you head over to carolinajournal.com. All the details, all the cross tabs. If you are a data guy, a data person that really gets into these, this is the good poll to dig into. And make sure you comment and follow. Let us know what you think about some of these numbers and some of the questions, if you think that we need to be looking at other issues. Make sure you tune in to The Debrief. We're here every Thursday, and follow us on social media and carolinajournal.com. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch The Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.